Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There exists, in the grim darkness of the far future, a threshold that no mortal should ever cross. It is not a physical boundary marked by walls or warnings, but rather a membrane so thin and fragile that it trembles with every heartbeat, every thought, every whispered prayer offered into the void. On one side lies reality as we understand it, the material universe with its laws of physics and its predictable causality. On the other side writhes something else entirely, a realm of pure thought and emotion given terrible form, where the impossible becomes inevitable and nightmares walk with purpose. This is the barrier between our world and the warp, and there are those who, through ignorance or ambition or sheer desperation, attempt to pierce that veil and draw forth what dwells beyond. They seek demons, entities of such alien malevolence that the very act of perceiving them can shatter a mind like glass struck by a hammer. These summoners believe they can control what they call forth, bind it to their will, harness its terrible power for their own ends. Sometimes, for brief moments that feel like victory, they succeed. But more often than anyone would care to admit, the ritual goes wrong. And when a demon summoning fails, the consequences are not measured in mere death or destruction, but in the corruption of reality itself. In the 41st millennium, humanity spreads across 1,000,000 worlds, each one a fragile island of order in an ocean of chaos. The Imperium of man, vast and terrible in its own right, maintains its grip on these worlds through faith, fear, and the brutal application of force. But there are threats that armored troops and orbital bombardments cannot address, dangers that exist beyond the reach of conventional weapons. The greatest of these threats comes not from alien races with their strange technologies, nor from rebel planets seeking independence, but from the warp itself and the entities that call it home. To understand what happens when demon summoning goes catastrophically wrong, we must first comprehend what demons truly are. They are not creatures in any biological sense, not organisms that evolved on distant worlds or spawned in forgotten laboratories. Demons are fragments of the chaos gods themselves, splinters of divine consciousness given independent existence and terrible purpose. When Khorne, the blood god, wishes to manifest his rage in the material universe, he expends a portion of his own power to create a bloodletter. When Nurgle, the plague father, desires to spread his gifts of disease, he births a plague bearer from his own essence. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, weaves horrors from the fabric of change itself, while Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, sculpts demonettes from the raw energy of sensation and desire. These are not mortal beings that can be reasoned with or understood through conventional logic. They are living concepts, emotions made flesh, thoughts given teeth and claws. A demon exists because a god willed it into being, and that same god can unmake it at any moment, drawing its power back into the greater whole. This makes demons simultaneously immortal and utterly expendable, eternal and disposable. They cannot truly die in the material realm, only be banished back to the warp where they must wait, nursing their wounded pride until they can manifest again. This simple fact makes them far more dangerous than any mortal enemy because they have nothing to lose and eternity to hold grudges. The warp itself, that roiling sea of psychic energy that lies parallel to our reality, is a reflection of the material universe filtered through the lens of emotion and thought. Every act of violence strengthens Khorne. Every whispered scheme feeds Tzeentch. Every moment of despair nourishes Nurgle. Every sensation, every pleasure or pain empowers Slaanesh. The two realms exist in constant interaction, each affecting the other in ways both subtle and catastrophic. When the barrier between them weakens or tears, demons can spill through into reality, bringing with them the impossible physics of the warp. But demons cannot simply manifest at will in the material universe. The laws of reality itself resist them, pushing back against their unnatural presence, like a body rejecting a foreign object. For a demon to exist in our world for more than brief moments, specific conditions must be met. The barrier must be weakened through ritual or violence or the presence of psychers whose very existence creates cracks in the veil. Emotional energy must be concentrated in specific patterns, offering the daemon a handhold on reality. And someone, somewhere, must call out to the warp, intentionally or not, creating an invitation that the daemons can accept. This is where summoning enters the picture. The deliberate act of reaching across the threshold and dragging something through from the other side. It is an act of staggering hubris, based on the assumption that mortal will can bind and control entities that are literal fragments of gods. Yet throughout the history of the Imperium, and long before it, there have been those willing to attempt such rituals. Chaos cultists seeking power, heretical sorcerers pursuing forbidden knowledge, even radical inquisitors who believe they can turn the weapons of chaos against itself. All have stood within summoning circles and spoken the words that invite damnation. The reasons for attempting such dangerous rites are as varied as those who perform them. Some seek military power, hoping to unleash demons against their enemies. Others pursue knowledge that exists only in the warp. Secrets of sorcery or technology that mortals were never meant to possess. A few believe they can save themselves or their loved ones through pacts with demonic entities. And some, corrupted by chaos already, summon demons simply because their patron gods demand it, offering up the ritual as a form of terrible worship. Whatever the motivation, the act of summoning follows certain patterns that have repeated across millennia and countless worlds. These are not arbitrary traditions, but necessary components drawn from hard-won and blood-soaked experience. The rituals vary in their specifics, adapted to the particular demon being summoned and the god it serves, but certain elements remain constant because they must. To summon a demon is to perform an act of spiritual engineering, creating a bridge between realities that should never touch. The summoning circle is perhaps the most recognizable element of any demonic ritual, and for good reason. It is not mere decoration or symbolic gesture, but a functional component, as necessary as the hull of a void ship traveling through the warp. The circle, when properly inscribed, creates a bounded space where the laws of reality can be temporarily suspended, a pocket of controlled unreality where a demon can manifest without immediately being expelled. The symbols that mark its circumference are not merely aesthetic choices, but specific patterns that resonate with warp energies, creating harmonics that attract certain types of demonic entities while repelling others. These circles must be drawn with exacting precision. A single line that deviates even slightly from its proper course can create a flaw in the boundary, a weakness that an intelligent demon will immediately exploit. The materials used matter as well, varying based on which god the demon serves. A circle intended to summon one of Khorne's demons might be drawn in fresh blood, the vital fluid of sacrifice literally marking the boundary. For Nurgle's servants, mixtures of diseased tissue and grave dirt might form the circle. Tzeentch's rituals often employ complex geometric patterns drawn in shimmering oils that shift colors in impossible ways. Slaanesh's circles might be inscribed with rare perfumes or the rendered fat of those who died in states of extreme sensation. The location where a summoning takes place matters perhaps as much as the circle itself. Reality is not uniformly thick. There are places where the barrier between the material universe and the warp grows thin, soft spots in the fabric of existence where the boundary can be more easily breached. Worlds that have seen great violence or suffering, sites of ancient battles where millions died in agony, temples dedicated to the chaos gods where worship has worn grooves in reality itself. These are the places where summonings are most likely to succeed. Conversely, Attempting to summon a demon on holy ground, in places consecrated to the emperor or protected by sanctified wards, makes the ritual exponentially more difficult and dangerous. The summoner must first corrupt or desecrate the location, an act that carries its own risks and complications. Many cults spend months or even years preparing a single site, slowly poisoning it with acts of blasphemy and sacrifice until the local reality becomes pliable enough for their purposes. Timing plays its role as well, though less rigidly than location. Certain astronomical alignments can weaken the barrier, moments when the immaterial warp presses close to the material realm. The proximity of other warp phenomena, such as warp storms or active warp rifts, can make summoning easier, but also far more dangerous and unpredictable. What begins as a controlled summoning of a single lesser demon can cascade into something far worse if performed too close to a major warp disturbance. The actual invocation, the words spoken to call the demon forth, must be chosen with care that borders on paranoia. Language has power in the warp, more literal and direct than most mortals can comprehend. To speak a demon's true name is to gain a measure of power over it, creating a thread of connection that can be used for binding. But discovering these true names requires research into forbidden texts, tomes written by madmen and heretics, books whose very ink seems to writhe on the page and whose words burrow into the reader's mind like maggots into flesh. Many ancient grimoires exist throughout the galaxy, hidden in the depths of inquisitorial vaults or tucked away in the private collections of rogue traders and chaos cultists. These books, some dating back to the Age of Strife or even earlier, contain fragments of demonic lore accumulated over millennia, but the knowledge they offer is never freely given and never without cost. Simply reading these texts exposes the reader to corruption, planting seeds of chaos in their thoughts that will grow and twist over time. Some who have studied demonology too deeply report that the words seem to read themselves, that they hear the incantations whispered in their dreams, called forth by the demons themselves who hunger for manifestation. The chanting that accompanies most summoning rituals serves multiple purposes. It focuses the will of the summoner, creating a sustained psychic resonance that bridges the gap between realities. It establishes rhythm and pattern, imposing structure on the chaotic energies being manipulated. And it serves as a continuous assertion of control, a repeated declaration that the summoner commands and the demon must obey. When multiple cultists chant together, their voices create harmonics that amplify the effect, making it easier to pierce the veil, but also making it more difficult to maintain precise control. Sacrifice is almost universally required, though the nature and scale vary dramatically based on what is being summoned. A minor demon, a simple fury or lesser entity, might require only the death of a single sentient being, their life force offered as payment, and their final moments of fear and pain, creating the emotional energy needed to anchor the demon in reality. But more powerful entities demand more substantial offerings. A bloodthirster of Khorne might require the deaths of hundreds or even thousands, their blood literally flooding the summoning chamber. A keeper of secrets of Slanesh might demand that the sacrifices experience specific sensations before death, creating a bouquet of particular emotional flavors for the Daemon to savor. The quality of the sacrifice matters as much as quantity. A Daemon being offered the soul of a psyker gains more sustenance than from a dozen normal humans. Someone who dies in a state of extreme emotion, whether terror or ecstasy or rage, provides more energy than someone whose death is quick and clinical. This leads some summoners to elaborate preparations, ensuring their sacrifices experience maximum suffering or sensation before the final moment. It is an ugly calculus, measuring lives not by their worth as people, but by their value as fuel for the summoning. Those who perform these rituals often work in groups, cults bound together by shared devotion to the chaos gods or united in their pursuit of forbidden power. The members of such cults serve various functions during the summoning. Some maintain the circle, walking its perimeter with blessed candles or censers that burn with alchemical smoke. Others perform the actual killing of sacrifices, their blades blessed with profane prayers. Still others focus entirely on the chanting, their voices rising and falling in patterns that hurt the ears and mind simultaneously. At the center of it all stands the primary summoner, the one who will attempt to bind and control the demon once it manifests. This individual must possess both knowledge of demonology and strength of will far beyond the norm. They must be able to maintain focus while surrounded by the psychic screaming of dying sacrifices, while their fellow cultists chant words that erode sanity, while reality itself begins to warp and buckle around them. And they must be prepared to engage in a battle of wills against an entity that is literally a fragment of a god, fighting for control in a contest where defeat means death at best and eternal damnation at worst. The moment of manifestation, when the demon actually appears in the material world, is described by those who have witnessed it as a violation of everything the mind knows to be possible. The air itself seems to tear, opening like a wound to reveal something beyond, something that should not and cannot exist in our reality. The demon emerges not as a creature stepping through a door, but as a concept forcing itself into a form that physical laws can barely contain. Its appearance defies description because mortal senses were never designed to process such things. The mind attempting to impose familiar patterns on something fundamentally alien. For those brief seconds during manifestation, while the demon is still partially in the warp and not yet fully anchored in reality, the summoner has their best opportunity to establish control. This is when the binding must be applied, when wards and constraints are invoked, when the summoner's will clashes directly against the daemon's drive for freedom and vengeance. Success means the demon finds itself trapped, bound by invisible chains forged from willpower and occult knowledge, forced to obey commands it despises. Failure means the demon emerges free and unfettered, no longer constrained by the summoning circle, no longer required to acknowledge the summoner's authority. The strength of binding can vary dramatically, creating different levels of control over the summoned demon. A once-bound demon must follow direct commands, but can interpret them with malicious creativity, finding ways to technically obey while causing maximum chaos and suffering. It will seek any loophole in its instructions, any ambiguity it can exploit to harm its summoner or their interests. A twice-bound demon has less freedom to maneuver, forced to follow both the letter and spirit of commands, though it will still resist and seek ways to weaken its bindings. A thrice-bound demon is as close to complete control as possible, though even then the demon retains its essential nature and will work constantly toward escape. Creating these bindings requires extensive preparation before the summoning even begins. Wards must be inscribed on the intended host if the demon is to possess a mortal body, or on the weapon or vehicle if it is to be bound into an object. Each layer of binding demands its own ritual, its own sacrifices, its own careful application of occult geometry and forbidden words. The process is exhausting and dangerous, exposing everyone involved to corruption from the warp energies being manipulated. Many who participate in applying bindings report feeling changed afterward, as though something of the warp has leaked into their souls and taken root there. The creation of a demon host, a mortal body possessed by and binding a demon, exemplifies both the potential and the danger of demon summoning. A properly created demon host becomes a weapon of terrible power, combining the demon's supernatural abilities with a physical form that can interact normally with the material world. The host's body becomes a prison that keeps the demon anchored in reality indefinitely, preventing it from being banished as it otherwise would be. Radical inquisitors have been known to create demon hosts, viewing them as necessary tools in the fight against chaos. weapons turned against their makers. But the process of creating a demon host is fraught with opportunities for catastrophic failure. The host body must be carefully prepared, alive, but rendered unable to resist the possession. The bindings must be applied with perfect precision, each ward and sigil placed exactly where it belongs. The summoning itself must draw forth a demon of appropriate power, not so weak that the resulting demon host is useless, but not so powerful that the bindings cannot hold it. And then, in the moment when demon meets host, there must be a battle of wills where the summoner forces the demon into submission. If any step fails, if the bindings are flawed, or the summoner's will proves insufficient, the result is an unbound demon host. The daemon takes full control of the host body with no constraints on its behavior, no compulsion to obey. It will immediately attack its would-be masters, killing them with gleeful malice before escaping to wreak whatever havoc it desires. An unbound demon host is particularly dangerous because it possesses the demon's power while being anchored in a physical form that cannot be simply banished, requiring conventional means to destroy or contain. Demon weapons present similar challenges and similar potential for disaster. The process of binding a demon into a sword or gun or other weapon creates an artifact of immense power, something that can cut through reality itself or project energies drawn directly from the warp. Chaos champions prize such weapons, considering them marks of favor from the gods and tools worthy of legendary warriors. But the creation process demands that a demon be summoned and then forced into the weapon against its will, held there by bindings woven into the weapon's very structure. A demon weapon whose bindings fail becomes something worse than useless. The demon, freed but still trapped within the weapon's physical form, will turn on its wielder at the first opportunity. It might refuse to function when needed most, leaving its wielder defenseless in battle, or it might strike at the wielder directly, turning in their hand to wound or kill them. Some demon weapons whose bindings have failed or weakened over time develop a malevolent intelligence that actively seeks to corrupt and ultimately destroy anyone who wields them, playing a long game of psychological warfare against their temporary masters. Demon engines represent perhaps the most ambitious and dangerous application of demon summoning. The fusion of warp entity with war machine to create weapons that combine technological might with supernatural power. The Dark Mechanicum and certain Chaos Space Marine warbands have mastered the creation of demon engines, binding powerful demons into the hulls of tanks, walkers, and even titans. The resulting constructs possess both the firepower of their mechanical components and the reality warping abilities of their demonic cores. Creating a demon engine requires coordinating three separate elements that each carry their own risks. First, the mechanical shell must be constructed or acquired, designed with spaces and structures specifically intended to house a demon. Second, the demon must be summoned through ritual, called forth from the warp with promises or threats, or forced through sheer psychic power. Third, and most difficult, the demon must be bound into the machine while it screams and fights against imprisonment, its essence woven into the metal and circuitry through processes that blur the line between technology and sorcery. When a demon engine binding fails, the results are immediate and catastrophic. The demon, possessing both its own terrible power and control over the war machine's weapons, becomes an unguided threat that will attack anything in range. Its own creators die first, torn apart by weapons meant to serve them. Then it rampages outward, killing indiscriminately until it is destroyed or its demonic essence is banished. Some failed demon engines have destroyed entire forge complexes, killing hundreds or thousands before they could be stopped, leaving behind scenes of carnage that must be purged with fire and prayer. But these failures, horrible as they are, represent only what happens when a summoning goes slightly wrong, when the binding is weak, but the ritual otherwise succeeds. These are the minor disasters, the acceptable losses in the eyes of those who traffic in such dangerous practices. The truly catastrophic failures occur not when the binding fails, but when the summoning itself goes fundamentally awry, when the barrier between worlds tears wider than intended, when more comes through than was called. The first sign that a summoning is spiraling out of control is often subtle, a slight deviation from the expected pattern that only the most experienced practitioners might notice. The summoning circle, which should contain and focus the energies being channeled, begins to flicker or fade. The chanting that should maintain steady rhythm starts to waver as some cultists lose their concentration or their minds crack under the psychic pressure. Sacrifices die too quickly or too slowly, their blood flowing in patterns that don't match the ritual's requirements. These small failures cascade, each one weakening the summoner's control and giving the manifesting demon more freedom to act. A demon, intelligent and malevolent, recognizes weakness immediately. It can feel the flaws in the binding even as it is being applied, testing each constraint as it takes form. If it finds the summoner's will lacking, if it detects errors in the circle or gaps in the wards, it pushes against those weaknesses with all its considerable strength. The battle becomes a race between the summoner trying to complete the binding and the demon trying to break free before it can be fully applied. When a demon wins this contest, when it manifests in the material world with no binding to constrain it, the first thing it does is turn on those who summoned it. This is not random violence, but calculated vengeance. Demons do not forgive the presumption of mortals who attempted to enslave them. The summoner, having stood at the center of the ritual and actively worked to bind the demon, becomes the primary target. Their death is rarely quick. Demons take time to inflict suffering, making an example that will echo in the warp for other demons to sense and appreciate. The cultists who assisted in the summoning die next, hunted down with methodical thoroughness. An unbound bloodletter moves through the ritual chamber like a surgeon with a blade, each cut placed with precision to maximize pain and blood flow. A freed demonette toys with its victims, introducing them to sensations that overwhelm their nervous systems and leave their minds shattered, even before their bodies fail. Horrors of Tzeentch rewrite reality around their summoners, turning their flesh into crystal or their thoughts into physical things that crawl from their skulls. Plague-bearers spread Nurgle's gifts with generous abandon, infecting everyone present with diseases that rot flesh from bones in minutes. But an unbound demon does not stop with killing those who summoned it. The breach in reality that allowed its manifestation remains open, a wound in the fabric of existence that bleeds energy from the warp into the material world. Through this opening, more demons can pour. What began as an attempt to summon a single lesser demon escalates into a full demonic incursion, as the summoning circle, meant to contain energies, instead becomes a portal. The transformation of a summoning chamber into an active warp portal follows a horrifying progression. Initially, reality around the summoning circle simply weakens, becoming more malleable. Physical laws start to behave inconsistently. Gravity might fluctuate, making people feel impossibly heavy one moment and weightless the next. Time stutters, with events happening out of sequence or repeating in loops. Colors gain sounds, or sounds develop taste, as sensory input crosses boundaries it should never cross. As more demons push through the weakened barrier, the portal grows wider and more stable. The summoning chamber takes on characteristics of the warp itself, transforming into a space that exists partially in both realities. Walls might become translucent, revealing scenes from the warp beyond, battles between demons, or the writhing geometries of their home realm. The floor could turn liquid while remaining solid enough to stand on, or develop mouths that whisper blasphemies in languages that hurt to hear. Objects in the room gain impossible properties, tools that exist in multiple places simultaneously, furniture that remembers futures that haven't happened yet. This contaminated space becomes self-sustaining, no longer requiring active ritual to keep the portal open. The emotional energy of those who die there, their terror and pain and despair, feeds the breach and helps it grow. Each death makes the portal larger, each moment of suffering weakens reality further. The demons that come through are no longer limited to what the summoners called. The the portal becomes indiscriminate, allowing any demon of sufficient power to force its way into the material world. The spread of corruption radiates outward from the portal in waves. Nearby rooms and corridors become tainted, taking on the unnatural properties of the summoning chamber. People in adjacent areas feel the psychic pressure, experiencing nightmares while awake, seeing things in the corners of their vision that vanish when looked at directly. Some go mad immediately, their minds unable to process the wrongness pressing against them. Others become vectors for possession, their weakened mental defenses allowing lesser demons to slip into their bodies and take control. If the breach occurs in a population center, a hive city, or fortress monastery, or orbital station, the contamination can spread with terrifying speed. A single successful possession creates a new demon that can kill and spread fear, generating more emotional energy to widen the portal. The possessed individual often appears normal at first, allowing them to move among others unsuspected, spreading corruption through touch or whispered words, or simply their corrupting presence. By the time the outbreak is recognized, it may already be too late to contain it through conventional means. The nature of the demons that come through an uncontrolled portal varies depending on which chaos god's energies dominate the breach. A portal tainted by Horn's influence draws his demons like sharks to bloodletters and fleshhounds, and eventually greater demons like bloodthirsters pour through to slaughter everything they find. The area around such a portal becomes a charnel house, floor ankle-deep in blood, walls painted with gore, the air thick with the copper smell of death and the screams of the dying. Khorne's demons care nothing for subtlety or long-term planning. They exist to kill and care only that blood flows and skulls are taken. An incursion of Khorne's demons will kill everyone in the immediate area with brutal efficiency, then spread outward in waves of violence, cutting down anything that moves until they are destroyed or the portal closes.
You know, one thing that's always fascinated me about the demon summoning lore in Warhammer is how it perfectly captures the tragedy of hubris. Every single summoner thinks they're different, that they're smarter or more prepared than the countless others who failed before them. And I think that's what makes these stories so compelling. It's not just about monsters breaking free. It's about watching people convince themselves they can control the uncontrollable. The really dark part? The Chaos Gods don't even need to force anyone. They just whisper possibilities, plant seeds of ambition, and mortals do the rest themselves. Brilliant writing because it mirrors real human psychology. A dangerous combination of desperation and arrogance that makes us ignore every warning sign. That's what keeps me coming back to this lore. It's horror grounded in something fundamentally human. Anyways, let's continue the story.
They make no distinction between summoners and innocents, enemies and allies. Everyone becomes a potential source of skulls for the Skull Throne. The aftermath of a Khornate incursion is relatively straightforward in its horror. The dead lie where they fell, hacked apart with axes or torn by claws, their blood soaking into the ground. The architecture might be damaged by violence but is not fundamentally changed. Once the demons are banished or destroyed and the portal sealed, what remains is recognizable as a place where terrible violence occurred, but still essentially part of the material world. Reconsecration and rebuilding can, in theory, restore such places to useful service, though the psychic stain of mass slaughter lingers. A portal dominated by Nurgle's influence brings different horrors. His demons emerge with a patience that Khorne's could never muster, spreading through the area methodically rather than in a frenzied charge. Plague-bearers count each death with grim satisfaction, maintaining tallies that have meaning only to them and their god. But they also spread Nurgle's gifts, diseases both mundane and supernatural that turn healthy bodies into gardens of decay. The diseases that emerge from a Nurgle portal defy medical understanding and treatment. Some kill in hours, rotting flesh from the inside while keeping victims conscious to experience every moment. Others transform the infected into new vectors, their bodies becoming breeding grounds for plagues that leap to anyone nearby. Still others change their victims fundamentally, mutating them into something that is no longer entirely human. Creatures that shamble through the spreading corruption, spreading more disease with every touch and breath. A Nurgle incursion transforms the physical space as well as the people within it. Walls become encrusted with fungal growths that pulse like living organs. Floors develop pools of stagnant liquid that breed diseases. The air itself becomes thick and toxic, requiring respirators that clog with filth and must be constantly replaced. Every surface becomes slick with decay, making movement treacherous. And through it all spreads a stench that goes beyond mere smell to become a physical force, a miasma that clings to everything and everyone, marking them as Nurgle's property. The psychological impact of a Nurgle incursion is particularly insidious. Where Khorne's demons inspire immediate terror that at least has the mercy of being brief, Nurgle's corruption breeds despair that grows slowly and never leaves. Watching your own body decay, feeling disease burrow into your organs, knowing that death is approaching but taking its time, this breaks people in ways that violence alone cannot. Many who survive the initial outbreak still carry the taint, becoming permanent vectors who must be watched constantly for signs of further corruption. Tzeentch's portals manifest perhaps the most disturbing violations of reality, because they fundamentally change what is possible. Where Khorne brings violence and Nurgle brings disease, Tzeentch brings impossible transformation. The demons that emerge from his portals, horrors and flamers and lords of change, warp everything they touch according to patterns only they understand. Reality becomes fluid, mutable, subject to change on scales ranging from the molecular to the cosmic. People caught in a Tzeentchian incursion might find themselves transformed physically, their flesh flowing like wax and hardening into new forms that bear no resemblance to human anatomy. Limbs multiply or merge, faces shift to different locations on the body, internal organs rearrange themselves into impossible configurations that somehow still sustain life. These mutations are not random but follow hidden patterns, changes that serve purposes known only to the architect of fate. But physical transformation is only the beginning. Tzeentch's demons alter causality itself, making effects precede causes or creating closed loops of events that feed back on themselves. A person might remember futures that haven't happened and forget pasts that did. They might find themselves living the same moment over and over, trapped in temporal loops where they can see themselves from the outside but cannot break free. Some become untethered from linear time entirely, experiencing their life out of sequence, birth and death, and everything between happening simultaneously. The architecture in areas touched by Tzeentch's influence defies comprehension. Corridors twist into impossible geometries, leading to places that cannot exist, or connecting rooms that should be on different levels or different buildings entirely. Staircases might climb up and down simultaneously, or lead to the same destination regardless of which direction you walk. Doorways open onto different locations each time they are used, or onto spaces that exist only partially in the material world, liminal zones between realities where the rules of existence become negotiable. Knowledge itself becomes dangerous near a Tzeentchian portal. Those exposed to the raw energies of change find forbidden lore forcing itself into their minds, occult secrets that they never wanted to know, burning themselves into memory. Some develop precognition, seeing futures that may or may not come to pass, unable to distinguish between prediction and delusion. Others gain sorcerous abilities they cannot control, accidentally manifesting warp phenomena that endanger everyone around them. Slaaneish's portals bring corruption of a different kind, targeting not the body or mind directly, but the senses and emotions that connect them. Daemonettes and seekers and keepers of secrets that emerge from such breaches bring with them an amplification of sensation so intense it becomes painful, then moves beyond pain into territory that has no name because mortal nervous systems were never meant to experience such extremes. The air around a Slaaneishi portal gains texture, becoming thick with scents that are simultaneously alluring and nauseating, beautiful and revolting. Colors become so vivid they burn to look at. Shades and hues that don't exist in nature, appearing in patterns that entrance the eye even as they damage it. Sounds take on physical weight, music that can be felt pressing against skin, vibrations that reach inside the body to massage organs and nerves directly. Those caught in a Slaaneshi incursion experience rapid escalation of every sensation. A touch that begins as pleasure becomes overwhelming, then painful, then something beyond pain that the mind cannot process. The nervous system overloads, sending contradictory signals that create experiences impossible to describe or categorize. Victims find themselves addicted to these sensations even as they destroy them, craving more even as they beg for it to stop. Unable to distinguish between pleasure and agony because the intensity has exceeded the range where such distinctions matter. The psychological corruption spreads as quickly as the physical. People become obsessed with sensation, willing to do anything for another hit of the overwhelming input. They harm themselves and others in pursuit of new experiences, each one requiring more extremity to achieve the same effect. Morality erodes as all that matters becomes the next sensation, the next experience, the next moment of intensity that makes everything else seem pale and lifeless by comparison. Slaaneshi daemons are also masters of manipulation, using their understanding of mortal desires to corrupt more subtly than their kin. They offer bargains and promises, tempting people with exactly what they most want, whether that is power or knowledge or love or revenge. And they deliver on these promises, at least initially, making the corruption seem worthwhile until it is far too late to turn back. By the time victims realize the price they are paying, they have already given up too much to stop. Regardless of which god's influence dominates the portal, the long-term consequences of a major demonic incursion are severe. The area around the breach becomes permanently tainted, marked by chaos in ways that resist all attempts at cleansing. The warp has touched reality there, and reality remembers. Even after the demons are banished and the portal sealed, even after months or years of purification rituals and the raising of contaminated structures, the psychic stain remains. These tainted locations become weak points in the barrier between worlds, places where future summonings will be easier and more dangerous. They attract chaos cultists like flies to rot, groups that sense the weakened reality and gather to exploit it. They become centers of ongoing corruption, requiring constant monitoring and periodic cleansing to prevent them from spawning new incursions. Many such sites are simply abandoned, marked as forbidden zones where no one is permitted to enter, surrounded by walls and wards, and guarded by those trained to watch for signs of renewed activity. On a planetary scale, a sufficiently large demonic incursion can doom an entire world. If the portal grows wide enough and remains open long enough, if enough demons pour through and spread too far to be contained, the planet itself can transform into a demon world. Reality there becomes permanently compromised. The material and immaterial bleeding together until the world exists in both realms simultaneously. Demon worlds are places of constant nightmare, where the impossible is mundane and sanity is a luxury none can afford. The landscapes shift and change without warning. Mountains are rising overnight and vanishing by morning, seas that burn with cold fire, forests of crystallized screams. The inhabitants, whether they chose to stay or were trapped when the transformation occurred, become warped by the constant exposure to warp energies, mutating into forms that serve the Chaos God's aesthetics. Time functions inconsistently on demon worlds. Centuries might pass in the material universe while only days pass on the demon world, or vice versa. Cause and effect become untethered, allowing events to influence their own past or futures, to reach back and alter present circumstances. Those trapped on such worlds lose all connection to normal reality, their existence becoming a fever dream from which there is no waking. The Imperium's response to major demonic incursions is brutal and absolute. When reports of such an outbreak reach Imperial authorities, the first response is quarantine. The affected area, whether a single building or an entire continent, is sealed off. No one is permitted to enter or leave. Orbital strikes might be authorized to prevent the incursion from spreading, killing everyone in the contaminated zone to save those outside it. This is not done out of cruelty, but necessity. The cold calculation that 1 million deaths now prevents 1 billion deaths later. If the incursion is severe enough and shows signs of potentially transforming the planet into a demon world, exterminatus may be authorized. Entire worlds are destroyed, their populations killed in an instant by weapons that crack continents and boil oceans. Better to lose a world and everyone on it than to allow it to become a permanent foothold for chaos, a staging ground from which demons can launch attacks into the material universe. The Grey Knights, the Imperium's premier demon hunters, respond to the worst incursions. These space marines are trained from birth in the arts of demon banishment and warp lore, their minds conditioned to resist corruption, their weapons blessed with the most powerful wards Imperial technology can create. They enter the heart of demonic incursions, fighting through hordes of lesser demons to reach the portal itself and seal it through ritual and force of will. But even the Grey Knights, for all their skill and training and faith, cannot save everyone or cleanse everything. Many incursions are discovered too late, the corruption spread too far to contain. Many worlds are lost despite their intervention. And the Grey Knights themselves are not immune to the horrors they witness, though their conditioning prevents full corruption. They still carry the psychic scars of their battles, memories of things no mortal should have to see or fight. The individual cost of witnessing or surviving a demonic incursion extends far beyond physical injury. Those who see demons in their full horror often suffer permanent psychological damage. The human mind is not equipped to process entities that violate every assumption about how reality works. Some survivors develop a persistent conviction that reality is not real, that everything is illusion or nightmare. Others become paranoid, unable to trust their own senses, constantly questioning whether what they see is real or demonic corruption. Many survivors cannot speak of what they witnessed, not because they are forbidden, but because language fails them. The experience transcends words, existing in a space where verbal description becomes meaningless. They carry the memories locked inside, unable to share them, unable to process them, the horror festering in their minds like spiritual rot. The Inquisition's standard response to civilians who witness demonic activity is execution. This is not cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated decision based on hard experience. Knowledge of demons corrupts, even passive knowledge, gained through mere observation. The person who knows demons exist becomes a vector for that knowledge, potentially spreading it to others. They become more susceptible to corruption themselves, the images in their memory serving as hooks that demons can use to gain purchase in their psyche. Those who participated in the summoning itself, even unwillingly, face darker fates. The exposure to warp energies during the ritual leaves marks that go deeper than memory. Their souls become stained, marked in ways that attract demonic attention. Some find themselves targeted by the very demons they tried to summon, hunted through their dreams and waking hours both. Others discover that they have gained unwanted psychic sensitivity, able to perceive things from the warp that they desperately wish they could not see. Physical mutations often appear in survivors of demonic incursions, changes that occur slowly over months or years. An extra eye might open in their forehead, or their fingers might fuse together into claws, or their skin might take on colors that have no place in nature. These mutations mark them as tainted, making them pariahs even if they escaped with their minds intact. Most are hunted down and killed by Imperial authorities, but some escape into the underhives or wilderness, living as outcasts and eventually falling fully into chaos worship because they have nowhere else to turn. The summoners themselves, those who stood at the center of the ritual and actively worked to call demons forth, face perhaps the worst fate of all. If they survive the immediate consequences of the summoning, and many do not, they find themselves forever changed. The act of reaching into the warp and touching its energies directly leaves permanent marks on their souls, corruption that cannot be cleansed or forgiven. Many summoners discover that they can no longer stop. The act of summoning becomes addictive. The rush of power and the thrill of touching the divine overwhelming any rational consideration of danger. They become trapped in a cycle, summoning again and again, each time hoping for better results, each time risking everything. The demons they call forth recognize this weakness and exploit it, offering just enough success to keep the summoner coming back, while slowly increasing the price demanded. The corruption spreads through every aspect of the summoner's existence. Relationships deteriorate as friends and family sense something wrong, some fundamental change that puts them on edge, even if they cannot articulate what disturbs them. Trust evaporates because the summoner's words carry an undercurrent of wrongness, promises that sound sincere but feel hollow. Physical health declines as the energies they channeled during summonings continue to work changes in their body, burning through their life force to fuel ongoing transformations. Sleep becomes difficult or impossible as nightmares plague anyone who has touched the warp so intimately. These are not ordinary dreams but invasions, demons reaching through the summoner's contaminated psyche to torment them. Some experience the same nightmare every night, reliving the moment of their failed summoning in perfect detail. Others face different horrors each time they close their eyes, an endless parade of demonic cruelty designed to break their will and prepare them for eventual possession. Possession represents the ultimate failure for a summoner, the complete inversion of their intent. They sought to control a demon, to bind it and force it to serve. Instead, they become the vessel, their body stolen and their consciousness pushed aside or destroyed. A possessed summoner becomes a demonic puppet, their knowledge and memories accessible to the demon, but their will no longer their own. The demon wearing a summoner's body has access to all their connections and knowledge. It knows their friends and associates, understands their routines and habits, can impersonate them well enough to fool those who knew them best. This makes possessed summoners particularly dangerous, able to move through society spreading corruption, recruiting new cultists, setting up additional summonings that will create more portals and more incursions. Some possessed individuals retain a fragment of awareness, trapped inside their own bodies, but unable to control their actions. They watch through their own eyes as the demon uses their hands to kill people they love, hear their own voice speaking blasphemies they would never choose to utter. This partial consciousness serves as additional torture, the demon keeping them aware specifically to increase their suffering. The last shreds of their soul provide emotional energy that strengthens the demon's hold on the physical body. Death offers no escape for those who have trafficked with demons. The Chaos Gods do not release the souls of those who have served them, willingly or not. When a summoner dies, whether in the moments after a failed ritual or decades later, after a life spent in chaos worship, their soul is drawn into the warp, rather than dispersing naturally. There it becomes raw material for the god it served, absorbed into the greater mass of that deity's power, or transformed into a lesser demon to serve for eternity. This eternal damnation makes the temporal suffering of failed summonings seem almost merciful by comparison. The physical pain of mutation, the psychological torment of corruption, the social isolation and eventual execution, these end with death. But the spiritual price continues forever, the soul that was once human becoming part of the infinite game the Chaos Gods play, used and discarded and reformed over and over without end. Yet despite all these horrors, despite the overwhelming evidence that demon summoning leads almost inevitably to disaster, the practice continues. Across 1,000,000 worlds, in hidden chambers and forgotten ruins, cult leaders and rogue psychers and ambitious sorcerers continue to draw summoning circles and speak the forbidden words. The question of why they persist in such obviously dangerous practices has multiple answers, each one revealing different aspects of how chaos corrupts and controls. For some, it is simple ignorance. They have heard stories of power offered by the warp, but do not understand the true cost. They believe themselves cleverer than previous summoners, capable of avoiding the mistakes that doomed others. They think the warnings are exaggerations or propaganda, that with proper preparation and sufficient will, they can achieve what so many before them failed to do. This ignorance is often willful, a refusal to accept evidence that contradicts their ambitions, and it makes them easy prey for chaos. Others are driven by desperation. They face situations where conventional solutions have failed or are unavailable, where death or disaster looms, and demon summoning seems like the only option remaining. A planetary governor whose world faces invasion might summon demons to fight the attackers, reasoning that corruption is preferable to conquest. A dying cult leader might attempt to summon a demon to possess them, choosing eternal damnation over the oblivion of death. These desperate summoners know the risks, but judge them acceptable given their circumstances. Ambition drives many to summon demons despite understanding the dangers. They see the power that successful summoners wield, the fear and respect commanded by those who have bound demons to their will. They want that power for themselves, convinced they can handle it better than others did. The temptation is particularly strong for those who already possess some power but seek more. Warriors who want to become legendary, sorcerers who desire access to forbidden knowledge, leaders who crave absolute control over their followers. For those already corrupted by chaos, summoning becomes not a choice, but a compulsion. The chaos gods speak to their followers through dreams and visions, commanding them to perform rituals. Refusing these commands is difficult or impossible, the god's will pressing against the cultist's mind like a physical weight. Many summoners perform their rituals not because they expect to succeed, but because they have no choice, driven forward by divine imperative they cannot resist. The chaos gods themselves ensure the cycle continues by occasionally allowing summonings to succeed. A cult that manages to bind a demon, even temporarily, gains a powerful weapon and the confidence to attempt more ambitious rituals. Word of their success spreads, inspiring other cults to try their own summonings. The vast majority of these attempts will fail catastrophically, but the chaos gods care nothing for the casualties. Every failure still serves their purposes, spreading corruption and creating opportunities for demonic incursion. The nature of chaos ensures that knowledge of demon summoning can never be fully suppressed. The Inquisition burns libraries and executes scholars. The Adeptus Ministorum preaches the dangers of forbidden lore, yet the knowledge persists. It survives in grimoires hidden away in private collections, in oral traditions passed through cult hierarchies, in psychic imprints left by previous summonings that sensitive individuals can detect and interpret. Chaos is self-replicating in this way, each manifestation creating conditions for future manifestations. The galaxy itself, locked in perpetual war and suffering, creates the emotional conditions that empower the chaos gods and make demon summoning possible. Desperation, ambition, rage, desire, these emotions flood the warp constantly, strengthening the gods and their demonic servants. Every battle fought empowers Horn. Every scheme hatched feeds Tzench. Every moment of despair nourishes Nurgle. Every sensation experienced amplifies Slanesh. The more the galaxy suffers, the stronger chaos becomes. And the stronger chaos becomes, the more the galaxy suffers. This creates a terrible equilibrium where demon summoning, despite its catastrophic failure rate, continues to seem like a viable option to those desperate or ambitious or corrupt enough to attempt it. The Imperium cannot prevent these attempts through prohibition alone, because prohibition does nothing to address the underlying conditions that drive people to such extremes. As long as humanity wars against itself and Xenos threats, and the fundamental horror of existence in the 41st millennium, There will be those who turn to chaos seeking solutions that conventional methods cannot provide. The technical improvements in summoning techniques, accumulated over millennia and passed down through cult traditions, make the practice more accessible while doing nothing to make it safer. Ancient grimoires provide detailed instructions that, if followed precisely, can successfully summon specific demons. Modern summoners have access to knowledge their ancestors could only dream of. Ritual refinements that increase the probability of successful manifestation, while doing nothing to increase the probability of successful binding. This creates a perverse situation where summonings succeed more often, manifesting demons into the material world with increasing reliability, while the binding still fails at approximately the same rate. The result is more unbound demons, more demonic incursions, more portals torn in reality's fabric. Each generation of summoners stands on the accumulated knowledge of their predecessors, able to call forth demons more easily than ever before, while remaining just as unable to control what they summon. The fragmentation of knowledge also contributes to ongoing failures. Complete grimoires are rare. Most summoners work from fragments and reconstructions, piecing together rituals from multiple incomplete sources. They might have the summoning incantation, but lack the proper binding wards. They might know the correct offerings, but perform the ritual in the wrong location or at the wrong time. These partial failures create situations where demons manifest, but without proper constraints, leading to the catastrophic outcomes we have discussed. Technology interacts with demon summoning in unpredictable ways, creating new categories of failure that ancient summoners never faced. The electromagnetic fields generated by Imperial technology can interfere with summoning circles, disrupting the delicate energy patterns needed for proper binding. Vox transmissions passing through an area during a summoning can contaminate the ritual, introducing random elements that alter which daemon responds to the call. The machine spirits that inhabit Imperial technology sometimes react violently to daemonic presence, causing weapons to misfire or equipment to malfunction at critical moments. These technological complications mean that demon summoning in the 41st millennium carries risks beyond those inherent to the practice itself. A summoner might perform every step perfectly according to ancient instructions, but fail anyway because their ritual chamber contains technology that did not exist when those instructions were written. The integration of technology and ritual requires expertise that few possess, creating yet another point of potential failure in an already dangerous process. The sheer scale of the Imperium ensures that despite the dangers and the high rate of catastrophic failure, demon summoning continues unabated across thousands of worlds simultaneously. On any given day, somewhere in the galaxy, a cult is drawing a summoning circle. Somewhere, a sorcerer is speaking a demon's true name. Somewhere, reality is tearing open to allow something terrible through. The Imperium's size makes it impossible to police effectively. The Inquisition cannot be everywhere. They respond to incursions after they occur, rather than preventing them before they begin. This reactive approach means that demon summoning will continue as long as the Imperium exists in its current form. The knowledge cannot be destroyed. The temptation cannot be eliminated. The desperation that drives people to such extremes cannot be addressed through policy or enforcement. Each failed summoning creates new horror, new opportunities for corruption, new weak points in reality that future summoners will exploit. The personal stories of those who attempt demon summoning and fail catastrophically are lost to history or suppressed by Imperial authorities, but they share common themes. The gradual realization that the ritual is going wrong, the growing certainty that control is slipping away, the moment when the demon breaks free and the summoner understands they are about to die. The final seconds of life spent in terror and regret, knowing that not even death will save them from what they have done. Some summoners, in their final moments, try to warn others or record their mistakes so that future attempts might avoid them. These warnings almost never reach anyone who might benefit from them. destroyed by the demons or lost in the chaos of the incursion, or suppressed by authorities who fear the spread of forbidden knowledge. The cycle repeats itself, because each new generation of summoners must learn the same lessons through their own failures, unable to benefit from the hard-won wisdom of their predecessors. The psychological profiles of those who attempt demon summoning, despite knowing the risks, reveal patterns that help explain the phenomenon's persistence. Many display a particular combination of high intelligence and low wisdom, able to comprehend the theoretical dangers while remaining convinced those dangers will not apply to them. They exhibit what some inquisitors have termed exception thinking, the belief that they are special enough or clever enough or favored enough to succeed where others failed. This exception thinking is itself a form of corruption, a cognitive distortion that chaos exploits and amplifies. The gods whisper to potential summoners, feeding their pride and ambition, convincing them that they are chosen instruments worthy of wielding demonic power. These whispers sound like the summoner's own thoughts, making them easy to accept and difficult to question. By the time the summoner realizes the thoughts are not entirely their own, the corruption has already taken root too deeply to excise. The social dynamics within chaos cults also perpetuate the cycle of failed summonings. Cult leaders maintain their authority through demonstrations of power, and successful demon summoning represents the ultimate proof of their connection to the gods. This creates pressure to attempt increasingly dangerous summonings, escalating from lesser demons to greater ones, from simple manifestation to complex bindings. The cult leader who shows hesitation or caution risks being replaced by an ambitious underling willing to take greater risks. The competitive nature of chaos worship ensures that even when a cult leader recognizes a summoning is too dangerous to attempt, they may proceed anyway rather than appear weak. This fear of losing face or authority overrides survival instinct, driving leaders to summon demons they know they cannot control. Their deaths and the destruction of their cults serve as object lessons that other cults rarely learn from, the cycle continuing unbroken. The economic aspects of demon summoning also contribute to its persistence. The components required for rituals, from rare alchemical compounds to specific types of sacrificial victims, create underground markets where merchants trade in the materials of damnation. These merchants have financial incentives to encourage summonings, profiting from the practice, regardless of whether individual attempts succeed or fail. They rarely participate in the rituals themselves, safely distant when things go wrong, ready to sell materials to the next group of summoners. The knowledge economy surrounding demon summoning functions similarly. Grimoires and instructional texts command enormous prices in certain markets, while experts in demonic lore can name their price for consulting services. These individuals profit from teaching others how to summon daemons while carefully avoiding the practice themselves, recognizing the dangers even as they enable others to take those risks. The hierarchy of demon manifestation deserves deeper examination, as the scale of disaster varies dramatically based on what type of entity breaks free from a failed summoning. Lesser demons, the most commonly summoned entities, represent the foot soldiers of the chaos gods. Bloodletters, demonettes, plague bearers, and horrors of Sinch. Each fulfills specific roles in their god's armies, and each brings distinct horrors when summoned without proper binding. A bloodletter that manifests unbound is a creature of pure violence, existing only to kill. It holds a massive blade wreathed in warp flame that can cut through ceramite armor as easily as flesh. The demon moves with supernatural speed despite its muscular bulk, closing distances that should take minutes in seconds, driven by an insatiable hunger for blood and skulls. In the confined space of a summoning chamber, an unbound bloodletter becomes an engine of slaughter, carving through cultists with mechanical efficiency. Each kill feeds it, the blood and rage strengthening its presence in the material world, allowing it to remain manifested longer and fight more ferociously. The aftermath of a bloodletter rampage is distinctive and unmistakable. Bodies lie scattered, hacked apart with precision that speaks to the demon's martial skill rather than mindless fury. Blood covers every surface, pooled on floors and splattered across walls and ceilings, the sheer volume impossible to achieve through normal means. The temperature in the area rises noticeably, residual heat from the demon's warp flame presence that lingers for hours or days. And there is the psychic residue, a sensation of barely contained violence that makes survivors aggressive and short-tempered, prone to outbursts of anger that can escalate into further violence. Demonettes bring different horrors when they emerge from failed summonings. These servants of Slaanesh appear beautiful at first glance, their forms crafted to appeal to the deepest desires of whoever views them. But that beauty is alien and wrong, too perfect to be natural, designed to attract and then corrupt. Their crab-like claws, wickedly sharp and impossibly strong, contrast jarringly with their otherwise alluring appearance. When a demonette breaks free from a summoning, it does not simply kill, but tortures, introducing victims to sensations that overwhelm and ultimately destroy. The demonette's modus operandi involves psychological warfare as much as physical violence. It speaks to its victims, promising them pleasure beyond imagining if they will only submit, offering bargains that sound reasonable until examined closely. Some victims accept these offers, falling under the demon's thrall willingly, becoming willing accomplices in their own corruption. Others resist, fighting against both the demon and the temptations it presents, struggling to maintain their identity against assault from within and without. A summoning chamber, where a demonette went free, takes on characteristics that reflect Slaanesh's influence. The air becomes thick with scents, both alluring and nauseating. Perfumes that smell wonderful until they trigger nausea, then smell wonderful again. Surfaces develop a slickness that is neither quite liquid nor quite solid, making movement treacherous and creating an uncomfortable sensation when touched. Colors become more vivid, almost painfully bright, while sounds gain clarity that borders on aggressive, every noise sharp and distinct to the point of discomfort. Plague-bearers, Nurgle's foot soldiers, manifest as walking masses of disease and decay. Their bodies are bloated with rot, green-grey flesh splitting open to reveal organs that should not function, yet somehow do. They carry rusted blades that deal wounds which refuse to heal properly, infections setting in immediately and spreading with unnatural speed. When a plague-bearer breaks free from its summoning, it does not rush to kill but instead spreads Nurgle's gifts with almost casual generosity, touching victims with diseased hands, breathing miasmic breath into their faces, sharing the grandfather's love with all it encounters. The transformation of space around an unbound plague-bearer occurs more gradually than with other demon types, but is perhaps more permanent. Disease spreads from the demon's location, carried by spores and viruses that drift through air and seep into surfaces. Within hours, everything in the area begins to decay. Metal rusts, developing patches of corrosion that spread visibly. Organic materials rot, breaking down into slime that smells of death and corruption. Even stone and ceramic begin to show signs of deterioration, developing cracks and pits that weaken structural integrity. The plague-bearers themselves maintain careful count of the diseases they spread, each demon tallying the infections it causes in service to Nurgle's great counting. They speak to their victims as they infect them, explaining in matter-of-fact tones what diseases they are receiving and how those diseases will progress. This clinical approach to spreading horror makes them particularly unsettling, as they show neither malice nor pleasure in their work, simply dedicated efficiency in serving their god's purpose. Horrors of Tzeentch, the most visually disturbing of lesser demons, exist in states of constant transformation. Pink horrors cackle madly as they skip and dance through battle, throwing warp fire that burns in impossible colors and transforms whatever it touches. When destroyed, pink horrors split into blue horrors, smaller and more vicious, attacking with clawed hands while muttering curses and complaints in contrast to their parent form's laughter. An unbound horror represents chaos in its purest form, rewriting the rules of reality in its immediate vicinity simply by existing there. The space around a manifested horror becomes unstable in fundamental ways. Physical laws cease to operate consistently, gravity fluctuating randomly, time running at different speeds in different locations, causality looping back on itself. People caught in these areas experience impossible sensations, seeing sounds or hearing colors, feeling time as a physical texture. Some undergo spontaneous mutations, their flesh flowing like wax, as tincture's energies rewrite their biology according to patterns only the changer of ways understands. Horrors particularly delight in corrupting knowledge and information. Books near them rewrite themselves, their contents shifting to contain forbidden lore or simply nonsense that appears meaningful but leads nowhere. Mechanical devices malfunction in bizarre ways, performing functions they were never designed for or operating according to principles that violate their construction. Computer systems develop impossible errors, displaying information that cannot exist, or executing commands that were never given. Greater demons represent an entirely different scale of threat when summoning fails. These are named entities, major demons with individual personalities and considerable power, each one a significant fragment of their god's consciousness. Summoning a greater demon is exponentially more difficult and dangerous than calling forth a lesser demon, requiring extensive preparation, significant sacrifices, and often a specific host body for the demon to possess. When such summonings go wrong, the consequences can doom entire worlds. A bloodthirster, greatest of Horn's servants, stands as tall as a small building, its form a muscular giant with leathery wings and massive horns. It carries weapons of incredible power, axes that can shatter tanks with single blows, and whips that flay armor from vehicles. But more dangerous than its physical attributes is the aura of rage it projects, a psychic pressure that drives everyone nearby into states of violent fury. Armies have torn themselves apart in the presence of an unbound bloodthirster, soldiers turning on their own comrades in frenzies of violence that leave no survivors. The summoning ritual for a bloodthirster requires hundreds of sacrifices at minimum, often thousands, their blood literally flooding the summoning area to create a pool deep enough for the demon to emerge from. If the binding fails, if the summoner proves unable to contain the bloodthirster's rage and bind it to their will, the demon's first action is typically to kill the summoner in a manner that makes an example. It might tear them apart slowly, piece by piece, while keeping them alive through warp energies to experience maximum suffering. Or it might force them to watch while it kills everyone they care about before granting them the mercy of death. A great unclean one, Nurgle's greater demon, is a mountain of rotting flesh that spreads disease simply by existing. Its body teems with plagues, each one capable of wiping out populations. Clouds of flies surround it, drawn to the decay, serving as messengers and scouts. When it moves, its bulk shaking the ground, it leaves trails of slime that breed new diseases. An unbound great unclean one can transform entire continents into plague gardens, every living thing infected and transformed into vectors for Nurgle's gifts. The ritual to summon a great unclean one demands preparation of a suitable host body, typically someone already dying of disease, but kept alive through medical intervention or warp energies. The summoner must guide the demon into this prepared vessel, while simultaneously establishing bindings that will constrain its power and force it to obey. If the binding fails, the great unclean one simply inhabits the host body without constraint, gaining a permanent anchor in the material world while retaining full access to its supernatural abilities. Lords of Change, the greater demons of Tzeentch, are perhaps the most dangerous of all when they break free from attempted bindings. These are sorcerers of tremendous power, capable of rewriting reality through warp manipulation, able to see futures and pasts with equal clarity, masters of deception who can appear as anything or anyone. An unbound Lord of Change does not simply kill its summoner, but corrupts them, transforming their body and soul into something that serves Tzeentch's incomprehensible plans. Entire civilizations have been manipulated and destroyed by single Lords of Change working over generations. Their schemes so complex that victims never realize they are being manipulated until too late. Summoning a Lord of Change requires not just sacrifice and ritual, but the creation of specific conditions that appeal to Tzeentch's nature. Knowledge must be destroyed even as it is sought. Changes must be initiated that will cascade in unpredictable ways. Hope must be offered and then snatched away. The summoner attempts to bind the Lord of Change through understanding and anticipation, predicting what the demon will do and preparing constraints accordingly. But the demon can see these preparations, can observe the summoner making their plans and adjust accordingly, making true binding nearly impossible. Keepers of secrets, Slaanesh's greater demons, combine beauty and horror in ways that shatter minds. They appear as perfect beings, embodying whatever the viewer finds most attractive, then reveal aspects that are alien and wrong, creating psychological whiplash that leaves victims vulnerable to manipulation. A keeper of secrets wields claws capable of cutting through anything and commands warp powers that amplify sensation to lethal levels. An unbound keeper of secrets transforms its surroundings into playgrounds of excess, creating experiences so intense they literally burn out the nervous systems of those who participate. The summoning of a keeper of secrets demands specific emotional conditions that are difficult to manufacture and dangerous to create. The summoner must generate intense sensations of very particular types, creating an emotional bouquet that attracts the demon's attention. Often this involves elaborate performances, organized events that push participants to extremes of sensation. When the binding fails, when the keeper of secrets manifests without constraint, it continues and amplifies whatever was already happening, driving participants past the boundaries of sanity and into states where they welcome their own destruction. Looking at the historical record, such as it exists and is accessible to those who study these matters, reveals that demon summoning has become more frequent rather than less over the Imperium's history. Each millennium sees more attempts, more catastrophic failures, more worlds tainted by demonic incursions. This acceleration correlates with several factors, including the spread of chaos corruption, the weakening of the barrier between warp and reality, and the increasing desperation of populations facing wars and disasters on every front. The formation of the Great Rift, that vast wound in reality cutting the galaxy in two, has made demon summoning simultaneously easier and more dangerous. The weakened barrier means manifestations occur more readily, but it also means less control over what comes through and less ability to seal portals once opened. Entire regions near the rift exist in states of constant demonic incursion. Reality so corrupted that the distinction between summoning and spontaneous manifestation becomes meaningless. These corrupted zones serve as grim previews of what failed demon summonings can accomplish on a galactic scale. They demonstrate that the ultimate consequence of widespread summoning is not individual damnation or planetary destruction, but the fundamental transformation of reality itself into something that better serves the Chaos God's purposes. Every failed summoning, every uncontrolled portal, every demonic incursion brings the galaxy one small step closer to that final corruption. The specific mechanics of how a summoning transitions from controlled ritual to uncontrolled catastrophe follow patterns that have been observed countless times, but remain difficult to prevent. The initial breach, the moment when the veil between warp and reality first parts, creates a point of vulnerability that can expand if not properly contained. The summoning circle, when functioning correctly, acts as both anchor and boundary, defining the space where the demon can manifest while preventing it from affecting areas beyond. But the circle is only as strong as its construction and the will maintaining it. Small errors accumulate into catastrophic failures. A summoner who mispronounces even a single syllable of a binding incantation may weaken the entire structure. A cultist who breaks concentration during a critical moment can cause harmonics in the chanting to destabilize. A sacrifice who dies with thoughts of defiance rather than terror might contaminate the emotional energy being channeled. These individual failures cascade, each one creating stress on the ritual's architecture until something gives way completely. The moment of total failure has been described by the few survivors who witnessed it as reality tearing like fabric. The summoning circle, which should contain the manifestation, instead becomes a wound through which far more than the intended demon can pass. The initial target may still manifest, but it comes through unbound, and the opening it created remains active, drawing other entities toward it like blood in water draws sharks. The proliferation of amateur summoners, individuals with incomplete knowledge attempting rituals they do not fully understand, has increased the frequency of catastrophic failures exponentially. In previous millennia, demon summoning was primarily the province of experienced sorcerers and established cults with traditions of practice spanning generations. These practitioners, while certainly not safe from failure, at least understood the risks and took precautions. Modern summoners often work from fragmentary sources, attempting rituals with missing components or altered specifications, ensuring failure from the outset. The democratization of forbidden knowledge through various means has created this situation. Where once ancient grimoires were secured in inquisitorial vaults or hidden in the libraries of powerful chaos cults, fragments of that knowledge now circulate more widely. A tech priest recovering data from a corrupted cogitator might find demons summoning instructions mixed with legitimate code. A scribe copying documents might unknowingly include pages from a heretical text. A Vox transmission passing through a region of space touched by warp storms might carry embedded patterns that, when decoded, reveal summoning formulae. Each of these accidental transmissions of knowledge creates new opportunities for disaster. The recipient may not even realize what they possess, viewing the information as merely academic interest until desperation or curiosity drives them to attempt what the instructions describe. They perform the ritual without understanding the precautions built into complete versions, without knowing that certain steps they skip as seemingly unnecessary are actually critical safety measures. The psychology of failed summoners reveals consistent patterns across cultures and time periods. Most display what scholars of demon lore term escalation compulsion, a progressive inability to recognize when they are in over their depth. They start with small experiments, minor invocations or preparatory rituals that seem to succeed without immediate consequences. This initial success breeds confidence, convincing them their approach is sound and they possess sufficient skill to attempt more ambitious workings. Each success, no matter how minor, reinforces their belief in their own ability while simultaneously exposing them to corruption that erodes judgment. The warp energies they manipulate leave residue in their psyche, subtle influences that make risky decisions seem reasonable and dangerous paths appear inviting. By the time they attempt a full demon summoning, their judgment has been so compromised that they cannot accurately assess their own capabilities or the likelihood of success. The social dynamics within summoning cults create additional pressure toward catastrophic failures. Hierarchies within these groups often depend on demonstrations of power and favor from the chaos gods. A cult leader maintains authority by successfully summoning and binding demons, proving their connection to divine power. Challengers to that authority must demonstrate equal or greater capability, leading to competitions where caution becomes a liability and recklessness a virtue. These internal competitions drive cults toward attempting summonings they are not prepared for, calling entities too powerful to bind, or performing rituals without proper preparation. The leader who hesitates or suggests waiting for better conditions risks appearing weak, opening themselves to challenge from subordinates who promise more immediate results. This creates a race to the bottom where the most reckless summoners gain power until their inevitable catastrophic failure destroys the entire cult. The contamination that failed summonings leave behind persists for far longer than most realize. Even after demons are banished and portals sealed, even after thorough cleansing and reconsecration, the psychic residue remains embedded in the location like radioactive fallout. This spiritual contamination attracts chaos worshippers, making the site more likely to become the focus of future summoning attempts. It also weakens the barrier between worlds, making subsequent summonings easier to accomplish but harder to control. Many locations have become serial sites of failed summonings, the same place used again and again by different groups separated by years or centuries. Each failure adds to the accumulated corruption, creating a spiral where the site becomes progressively more dangerous, but simultaneously more attractive to those seeking to commune with the warp. Eventually, such locations may transition into permanent weak points, places where demons can manifest spontaneously without requiring summoning at all. The Imperium maintains databases of known contaminated sites, requiring constant monitoring and periodic cleansing operations. These locations are typically surrounded by restricted zones, populations kept at safe distances, and specialized forces stationed nearby to respond quickly to any signs of demonic activity. Yet despite these precautions, new summonings occur regularly at these sites, drawn by the accumulated corruption and the weakened barrier. The economic cost of dealing with failed demon summonings extends far beyond the immediate casualties and physical damage. Entire regions must be quarantined for extended periods, disrupting trade and communication. Cleansing operations require rare materials and specialized expertise, both expensive and difficult to procure. The psychological impact on survivors necessitates extensive counseling and monitoring, as those exposed to demonic manifestation remain vulnerable to future corruption. Populations near sites of major failed summonings often must be relocated entirely, abandoned cities becoming monuments to the dangers of trafficking with demons. These ghost cities serve as warnings, but also as opportunities for rogue elements to explore and scavenge, frequently leading to new incidents of demon summoning as explorers discover corrupted artifacts or forbidden texts left behind. The cycle perpetuates itself, each failed summoning creating conditions for future failures. The technological disruption caused by demonic incursions creates cascading effects that can destabilize entire systems. Machine spirits, the semi-sentient presences that inhabit Imperial technology, react violently to demonic presence, often becoming corrupted themselves or shutting down entirely to avoid contamination. Critical infrastructure fails, life support systems malfunction, communication networks collapse. These failures compound the crisis, making response and containment more difficult. Some failed summonings have occurred in locations where technological disruption proved more devastating than the demons themselves. A summoning aboard an orbital station might kill only the cultists directly involved, but the resulting technological failures could cause life support to fail or station-keeping systems to malfunction, dooming thousands. A summoning in a hive city's power generation facility could plunge millions into darkness and cold, creating chaos that kills more than the demons ever could. The documentation of specific failed summonings is deliberately sparse, as detailed records would themselves constitute forbidden knowledge capable of inspiring future attempts. But certain cases have become known through inquisitorial reports or survivor testimony, serving as cautionary tales even if the specifics remain classified. One such incident, referred to only as the Valthex abomination, occurred in the mid-39th millennium on an industrial world whose name has been struck from official records. According to fragmentary accounts, a tech priest corrupted by exposure to scrap code discovered instructions for summoning Daemon engines embedded in ancient data files. believing they could create an army of such weapons to defend against an imminent orc invasion. The tech priest organized a mass summoning involving dozens of incomplete vehicle hulls and hundreds of cultists drawn from the factory workers. The ritual failed catastrophically when the demons summoned proved too powerful for the prepared bindings, and instead of being bound into the waiting vehicles, they manifested free and turned the entire factory complex into a charnel house. The unbound demons then possessed the vehicles anyway, but without constraint, creating a fleet of demon engines loyal to no one and driven only by the desire to kill and destroy. These corrupted war machines rampaged across the planet's surface for weeks, destroying infrastructure and slaughtering populations until an entire Space Marine chapter was deployed to hunt them down. Even after the demon engines were destroyed and the planet declared cleansed, psychic contamination remained so severe that the world was eventually abandoned, its population relocated, and its industrial capacity lost to the Imperium forever. Another documented case, known as the Cathedral Incident, involved a radical inquisitor who believed they could bind a Lord of Change to gain access to its precognitive abilities. The inquisitor had studied demonology for decades and genuinely believed they possessed sufficient knowledge and willpower to control such a powerful entity. They performed the summoning in a converted cathedral, surrounded by the most powerful wards known to imperial mysticism, with dozens of Grey Knights standing ready to banish the demon if the binding failed. Despite these precautions, the summoning went catastrophically wrong. The Lord of Change, having foreseen the attempt and prepared for it, allowed itself to be summoned, but corrupted the binding wards during the moment of manifestation, turning them from constraining forces into anchors that kept the banishment the Grey Knights attempted from taking effect. The resulting battle destroyed the cathedral and killed everyone present except the Lord of Change itself, which disappeared after slaughtering the Inquisitor and their entire retinue. More disturbing still, subsequent investigation revealed that the Inquisitor had been manipulated from the beginning, their decades of research guided by subtle influences that ensured they would eventually attempt this specific summoning at this specific time and place. The Lord of Change had engineered its own temporary manifestation in the material world, using the Inquisitor as an unwitting tool to create the conditions for the summoning. This revelation cast doubt on how many other demon summonings might actually be the demons summoning themselves, manipulating mortal pawns into creating the circumstances for their manifestation. The theological implications of failed demon summonings have been debated extensively by imperial scholars and ecclesiarchs. Some argue that these failures represent the emperor's justice, punishing those who would traffic with chaos by allowing them to experience the consequences of their heresy. Others view them as evidence of humanity's fundamental weakness, proof that mortals lack the strength to resist chaos without the emperor's direct protection. Still others see them as strategic victories for chaos, each failed summoning spreading corruption and weakening reality regardless of the summoner's fate. These theological debates have practical implications for how the Imperium responds to demon summoning. If failed summonings are divine punishment, then perhaps they should be allowed to run their course, the wicked destroying themselves through their own actions. If they are evidence of weakness, then perhaps greater emphasis should be placed on spiritual strengthening of the population, more prayer and faith to resist temptation. If they are chaos victories, then more aggressive suppression is warranted, seeking out and destroying potential summoners before they can act. In practice, the Imperium pursues all three approaches simultaneously, different factions and organizations following their own philosophies. The Inquisition actively hunts heretics and destroys summoning cults. The ecclesiarchy preaches against the dangers of forbidden knowledge and the importance of faith. And some radical elements within both organizations study demonology themselves, seeking to understand the enemy even at risk of corruption. The eternal nature of demons creates unique challenges for those attempting to learn from failed summonings. A bloodletter, banished today after a failed summoning, will eventually return to the material world, whether through another summoning or through spontaneous manifestation during a warp storm. It will remember its previous encounter, will have learned from the experience, and will apply that knowledge to avoid whatever banished it last time. Each failed summoning thus educates demons about reality's weaknesses and imperial capabilities, making future incursions potentially more dangerous. This creates an asymmetry where demons accumulate experience across thousands of years, while individual mortals rarely survive more than a few encounters. A greater demon that has been summoned and banished dozens of times understands reality's rules better than most mortal scholars ever will. It has tested wards and bindings across centuries, learning which are effective and which are vulnerable. It can recognize patterns in summoning attempts, predict what the summoner will try to do, and prepare countermeasures accordingly. The concept of personal responsibility for failed demon summonings is complicated by the fact that chaos corrupts judgment before the actual summoning occurs. The individual who stands in the summoning circle performing the ritual is already compromised, their decision-making influenced by warp energies and demonic whispers. They may believe they are acting of their own free will, but that will has been shaped by forces they cannot perceive or resist. This raises questions about culpability, whether summoners are truly responsible for their actions or are themselves victims of the Chaos God's manipulations. The Imperium's official position is that ignorance and corruption do not excuse heresy. Anyone who participates in demon summoning, for whatever reason and regardless of outcome, has committed an unforgivable sin and must be eliminated. This zero-tolerance approach stems from practical necessity rather than theological absolutism. The risk of corruption spreading is too great to allow exceptions, the danger of a seemingly repentant summoner relapsing too high. Mercy, in this context, would endanger billions to save one individual. Yet this harsh approach creates its own problems by ensuring that anyone with knowledge of demon summoning has strong incentive to keep that knowledge hidden. A scholar who accidentally discovers forbidden lore faces execution if they report it, creating pressure to instead attempt to destroy the knowledge privately, or worse, to explore it further out of desperate curiosity. The fear of punishment thus contributes to the very problem it seeks to prevent, driving demon summoning underground where it becomes harder to detect and contain. Some within the Imperium have proposed alternative approaches, suggesting that controlled study of demon summoning under strict oversight might better serve humanity than absolute prohibition. These voices argue that understanding the mechanisms of summoning would allow more effective interdiction, that recognizing the early signs of planned summonings would enable prevention rather than punishment. But such proposals face fierce opposition from those who believe any engagement with demon lore, however well-intentioned, inevitably leads to corruption. The debate remains unresolved because both sides can point to evidence supporting their position. There have been cases where individuals with knowledge of demon summoning used that knowledge to prevent disasters, identifying and disrupting cult operations before they could complete dangerous rituals. But there have also been numerous cases where individuals who claim to be studying demon summoning for defensive purposes eventually fell to corruption themselves, becoming the very threat they ostensibly sought to prevent. The Imperium's theologians and scholars debate whether chaos can ultimately be defeated or merely contained, and these debates inform policy regarding demon summoning. Some argue for maximum suppression, executing anyone with knowledge of summoning rituals and destroying all grimoires, no matter their historical value. Others advocate for controlled study, believing that understanding the enemy is necessary to fighting it effectively, even at the risk of corruption. This debate has no resolution because both sides present valid arguments backed by historical evidence. Suppression has failed to prevent demon summoning despite millennia of effort, while controlled study has produced valuable intelligence but also resulted in numerous cases of researchers becoming corrupted and turning to chaos themselves. The Imperium continues to pursue both approaches simultaneously, different inquisitorial factions and ecclesiarchal orders following their own philosophies. The personal cost to those tasked with studying or combating demon summoning is rarely acknowledged, but always present. Inquisitors who specialize in demonic incursions report high rates of nightmares, paranoia, and psychological deterioration even when they resist full corruption. The Grey Knights, for all their conditioning and faith, still carry scars from what they witness and fight. The simple act of knowing too much about demons creates vulnerability, making these warriors and investigators targets for the very entities they hunt. This creates a tragic irony where those most capable of preventing or containing failed daemon summonings are also those most at risk of corruption. The expertise needed to seal a daemonic portal requires exposure to knowledge that most mortals cannot safely possess. The experience necessary to recognize an impending summoning comes from studying successful attempts, which means exposing oneself to the methods and rituals. Every expert in demon summoning exists in a state of controlled corruption, walking a razor's edge between useful knowledge and damning taint. The question of whether demon summoning serves any legitimate purpose, whether the risks could ever be justified by the potential benefits, has been debated throughout imperial history. Certain radical inquisitors argue that demon hosts, when properly bound and controlled, represent weapons too valuable to abandon. They point to cases where bound demons have provided intelligence on chaos activities or served as effective counters to other demonic threats. They argue that the Imperium cannot afford to unilaterally disarm when enemies routinely employ demonic servants. The counter-argument, supported by the majority of the Inquisition and virtually all imperial institutions, holds that demon summoning cannot be controlled sufficiently to justify the risks. The failure rate is too high, the consequences of failure too catastrophic, the corruption inevitable even in successful attempts. They point to the overwhelming evidence that attempting to use chaos against itself leads inevitably to serving chaos, that there is no such thing as controlled demon summoning over the long term. Both positions find support in the historical record, which contains examples of successful demon binding that served imperial interests, and examples of radical inquisitors whose attempts to control daemons led to their corruption and damnation. The debate continues because neither side can definitively prove their case, and because the individuals involved in these discussions are themselves susceptible to the very corruption they debate. The future of demon summoning in the Imperium appears grim, regardless of which approach prevails. If suppression continues to be the primary strategy, it will continue to fail as it has failed for millennia, unable to prevent desperate or ambitious individuals from attempting rituals that will lead to catastrophic incursions. If controlled study is expanded, it will likely produce more knowledge about demon summoning while also creating more opportunities for that knowledge to be misused or fall into the wrong hands. The only certain prediction is that demon summoning will continue, that reality will continue to be torn by uncontrolled portals, that worlds will continue to be lost to demonic incursion. The cycle is self-sustaining, each failure creating conditions that encourage future attempts, each disaster demonstrating power that others will seek to claim for themselves. As long as the Chaos Gods exist and mortals retain free will, there will be those who draw summoning circles and speak forbidden names. In the end, the horror of demon summoning gone wrong lies not in any single catastrophe, but in the aggregate weight of countless failures across thousands of years and millions of worlds. Each individual incident might seem like an isolated tragedy, a cult destroyed by their own ambitions, a world lost to corruption, a portal torn in reality's fabric. But taken together, these failures represent a slow erosion of the galaxy itself, a gradual victory for chaos achieved not through grand campaigns, but through the accumulated weight of small defeats. The summoner who stands in their ritual circle, preparing to speak the words that will call a demon forth, stands at the end of a chain of failures stretching back to the first mortal who ever attempted such a thing. They inherit the mistakes of everyone who came before, repeat the same errors despite warnings they never received or chose to ignore, contribute their own small failure to the ever-growing total. Their individual suffering, as terrible as it may be, represents only the latest iteration of a pattern that has repeated since before the Imperium existed and will continue long after. This is perhaps the darkest truth about demon summoning. It is not an aberration, but a feature of the universe the Imperium inhabits. The existence of the warp and the chaos gods makes such attempts inevitable. The nature of mortal psychology makes failure equally inevitable. And the mechanics of chaos ensure that each failure serves the gods' purposes, even as it destroys those who attempted to command demonic servants. There is no solution to this problem, no policy or technology or faith that can prevent it.
Only the grim necessity of containing each outbreak and preparing for the next. For those who exist in the 41st millennium, this represents a fundamental aspect of the horror that surrounds them. The universe they inhabit is not merely dangerous, but actively hostile, filled with entities that cannot be reasoned with or appeased, driven by motivations that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. The best that can be achieved is survival, and even that is temporary. Demons are patient beyond mortal understanding, and every failed summoning teaches them something new about reality's weaknesses, information they share with their gods and fellow demons, preparing for the day when the barrier finally fails completely. That day may be centuries or millennia away, or it may be approaching with terrifying speed.
The acceleration of demonic incursions suggests the latter, that reality grows weaker with each portal torn, each world transformed, each soul consumed. The Imperium fights to hold back this tide, but it fights a defensive war against an enemy that cannot truly be defeated, only delayed. Every failed demon summoning brings that final defeat one small step closer, not through any single overwhelming blow, but through the slow accumulation of wounds that never fully heal. This is what happens when demon summoning goes wrong in Warhammer 40k. Not merely death and destruction, though those come in abundance. Not simply corruption and damnation, though those are guaranteed. But the fundamental undermining of reality itself, the slow transformation of the galaxy into something that better serves the Chaos God's incomprehensible purposes. Every summoning circle drawn is a small bet against the universe's continued existence in recognizable form, and the house always wins, not immediately, but inevitably, over timescales that make mortal lifespans seem like eye blinks. Those who would summon demons stand at the threshold of oblivion, reaching for power they cannot control, inviting horrors they cannot comprehend, serving purposes they do not understand. Their failures doom not only themselves, but contribute to the galaxy's slow slide into final chaos. And yet they persist, driven by desperation or ambition or corruption, adding their failures to the uncounted masses who came before, preparing the way for those who will come after. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, but there is also demon summoning, another front in humanity's endless struggle for survival, one where every battle is a loss and every victory temporary at best. The portals tear, the demons come through, reality warps and breaks, and sometimes does not fully heal. And in hidden chambers across a million worlds, new summoners draw their circles and speak their invocations, convinced they will succeed where countless others failed, blind to the fact that they are not using demons, but being used by them, not claiming power, but offering themselves as sacrifices to entities that will never stop hungering for more. This is the true horror, not the immediate consequences of a single failed summoning, but the certainty that such failures will continue until there is nothing left to fail, until reality itself has been so corrupted that the distinction between warp and material universe ceases to have meaning. Every demon summoning brings that day closer. Every failure accelerates the process, and there is no force in the galaxy powerful enough to stop it. Only faithful servants who fight to delay the inevitable, buying time measured in centuries or years, or sometimes only hours, holding back the darkness, for as long as mortal flesh and will can endure. If you found this exploration of demon summoning's darkest possibilities illuminating, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We delve deep into the lore of Warhammer 40k, examining the mechanisms and consequences of the universe's most terrible phenomena. More content exploring the grim darkness of the far future awaits, covering everything from the intricacies of chaos corruption to the desperate struggles of those who fight against impossible odds. Join us as we continue to explore the horrors and wonders of the 41st millennium, where knowledge is both weapon and curse, and understanding comes at prices that can never be fully paid.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.